Hi there, Cassidy here, and welcome to Sprouting Artistry, a place where we explore what it means to create more sustainably. Today I have a conversation with Shawn Boskie. Shawn Boskie works in the Christian filmmaking world, but I actually know him because he's a family friend. Back when I lived in Phoenix, he was willing to carve out some time for me to give me some advice about filmmaking, let me ask some questions, and what sprung from that was sort of this bigger conversation about the ethics of filmmaking and Christianity and how that plays a part in what we create. And I just really enjoyed the conversation. So I asked if he would come and sort of rehash some of those topics on a recorded call. And he was more than gracious to accept. So I hope you enjoy the conversation. Filmmaking always has a special place in my heart. So having back and forth about that is something that's always enjoyable for me. So I hope you find it enjoyable too. Hi, Shawn. Thank you so much for having a conversation with me today.
Yeah, great to be with you, Cassidy.
Yeah. So before we get into the topic, why don't you give a brief sort of background on who you are? What's your story? How did you kind of get into filmmaking?
Should I start? It all started in a little town in Nevada.
Yeah, sure. As long as far back as you need to go.
Well, it's probably of somewhat note to say that I started by playing baseball for a living. I got drafted by the Chicago Cubs out of community college or junior college out in California back in the mid 80s. And I had a career in baseball for 15 years, played with a number of different teams, starting with the Cubs in Chicago. Throughout the 90s, I played in the major leagues. And, during the time that I was playing baseball, of course, people would ask what I was going to do for a living when I had to get a real job. And that was always a tough question. I didn't really know the answer to it, but I was thinking about it a lot. Especially, you tend to think about that more when you have a bad game. So in my case, that thought was going through my mind pretty regularly, it seemed like. But once the end of my baseball career came, then I started meeting with different people in my just relationship sphere, and people in church that looked like that they had established a career. So it was, in a lot of ways, it was kind of like getting out of college or getting out of the military and trying to figure out what was next.
Mm-hmm.
So I was just exploring different options, and I ended up getting together with a couple of guys that were putting together an investment fund to make investments into private companies in different types of sectors of business, like technology or real estate even. And we had an investment in a restaurant. And so what I started doing was raising money to have a little bit of a fund that then we would strive to get good returns for these investors. And,
Mm-hmm.
it was tough to do that. Of course, nobody that I was talking to about putting money into this fund could look at me and trust that I knew what I was doing because I'd just been a baseball player. But I was always appealing to the strength and the experience of the team that I was with.
Mm-hmm.
And what I learned was that was how I was learning how to raise money, actually, to communicate, what could be sort of complex topic in a way that made sense for people.
Right.
So I just tried to put myself in their shoes. What would this sound like if I was listening to myself talk about this? And you had to spend a lot of time with the people. You had to be where they were, people that could invest in alternative investments.
Right.
So I did that for a while, and I ultimately ended up getting my real estate license. I was going to do some of the same sort of stuff in real estate. But I happened to be in a small group from my church that one of the guys worked at a nonprofit organization called Alliance Defense Fund,
Mm-hmm.
which is called Alliance Defending Freedom nowadays. And he said, hey, before you go down that road too far, you should really look at what we're doing, because we're growing fast and it's a great organization. And it happened to be based where I live here in Scottsdale, Arizona. So I met with the CEO and was really impressed with the work they were doing. And I ended up joining in with them.
Hmm.
And now I was raising money for a nonprofit legal organization. But it sort of reinforced a lot of the same things, which is I was meeting with people that had a lot of capability. They were tended to be entrepreneurial type people that had built businesses. And in the meantime, I was also still dabbling in investments myself with friends. But I became the head of the fundraising team for that organization, and it was great experience. I did that for quite a while. And to get to the film world, well, our company was right across the parking lot from a small little independent film company called PureFlix, and
Mm.
I had somebody introduce me to the CEO of PureFlix, and he was a great guy. Thought it was a great guy. I had not heard of any of those movies that they had done, and the posters were up around their office and so forth. But I really liked him, and he knew that I knew people that had money, and in the independent film world, you need money. So
Yes.
we
I
so
know
we
very
talked
well.
about that. Yeah, yeah, and uh, we would have lunch maybe a couple of times a year and just catch up on things. And then I started noticing some of the donors to Alliance Defending Freedom were also investing in some of these movies,
Mm.
faith movies.
Hmm.
And I didn't really know why they were doing that. I thought maybe that they thought it was just fun and interesting. Maybe they had stars in their eyes. But later it kind of dawned on me that they were doing it for a lot of the same reasons that they were donating money to our organization, because they cared about our culture and the environment and our biblical heritage in this country and some of those things, and they wanted to see those reinforced in the entertainment space. So
Mm.
that was really interesting to me, and I became more intrigued with it. I told my friend that was the CEO of PureFlix that if there was a project that aligned with what our organization was doing, then maybe we would get involved. And not long after that, he told me about a movie that they were filming that had a college professor that was hassling a first year student in a philosophy course, where he was telling him he needed to sign a paper that said God is dead so that they could commence with their education and philosophy about the world. And the student was identified himself as a Christian, and he said he couldn't do that. And then he had to stand up in front of the class and do an apologetic or a defense of why God is real. And
Hmm.
it became a hit movie. But our organization also got involved with it
Mm.
to help support the marketing efforts,
Mm.
and also listed a bunch of legal cases that were actually happening across the country, very similar to the scenario in the movie.
Mm.
So the movie became a big success. Um, Unfortunately, my friend Russell, the CEO of PureFlix, was diagnosed with ALS right before the movie
Mm.
came out.
Mm.
So by the summer of 2014, he was slurring his speech and deteriorating, and he asked me if I would join PureFlix to head up investor relations and to grow, the impact of these movies. And I did. I got involved in it there. So that was the beginning. There's lots more, but because those movies had a broad reach, and they could have a great impact, I found that there was a lot of people that wanted to be involved.
Yeah, no, it's so funny you say all these names. I know all of these companies coming from Arizona. I have friends who've worked, yeah, at the legal company you're speaking of, and so it's very interesting to hear that and be like, oh wow, I didn't know you were so involved in all those things. Thank you for that. What made you ultimately decide, hey, I'm going to give up this one position and go into filmmaking? Which it's funny you say that baseball felt like you didn't have a real job. For me, it feels like a filmmaker. I don't have a real job. So it's sort of funny. It's like, what made you make that switch to try something else that was sort of like the dream, if you will?
Right. There's been people through the years that have said, man, your career is so weird and interesting. You've done all these different things: legal, nonprofit, movie world, baseball career. I've been invested in several different things, software and medical device companies, and it is interesting and it fits what I care about. I'm kind of have a relatively low attention span, but I like learning about a lot of different things. So that's been tons of fun. But you know, the answer to your question comes back to probably those days when I was playing and trying to figure out what was next. My wife and I went to a little weekend seminar um, an organization that was designed to help people figure out what their career path was and what their gifting and their interests are, and
Mm.
what did God have to say about, any of these topics.
Right.
So we thought that was interesting. So we signed up, and before we arrived, they sent us a bunch of materials, personality profile tests, and all sorts of different things that we had to do. In fact, just a little aside, we filled out one of them was a workbook with maybe 100 questions. And then after the questions was thousands of jobs listed by just code numbers. And after you filled out the 100 questions, then you would see what your personality and your profile sort of lined up with careers. And my wife and I got a kick out of it because we had one of the same careers on our that matched each other. And that career was kennel operator. And we were like looking at each other like, I guess it's a done deal. We need to open up a kennel and start taking care of animals. So every now and then we kind of laugh about that. Like, I don't know why we've waited this long to finally do it. But
Yeah.
anyway, we
Retirement
showed
scheme.
up. Exactly. Yeah. And we do love animals. In fact, my dog's sitting right here listening. But anyway, we went to the seminar, and it was good. It was, it was a lot of interesting material that you would assume that, work is actually a good thing. It's good to work. It's not a curse. Work is hard though sometimes, and it forms you and shapes you and moves you into different arenas that you maybe didn't think you were going into. All sorts of different things happen with work and the people that you're around, and all those things. But at the end of that little seminar, they had all of us write our mission statement based on what we had learned over the course of the last day and a half. And I remember that I wrote that I will be involved with something that has a larger social impact, but with an eternal significance to it.
Mm.
And I remember thinking to myself, that seems accurate to me, but I don't know what that means at all with regard to my career or my job. But fast forward several years later, it dawned on me when I was working with Alliance Defense Fund, Alliance Defending Freedom, that some of these court cases that were going up to the Supreme Court were impacting, millions of people and our culture. And that was pretty energizing to me. And then the same was true when I got involved with the movie world, that some of these movies are seen by tens of millions of people. They can be very inspirational and change the course of people's lives too. So that was super energizing to me. It still remains that way now. That's what I try to use as a sort of matrix on things that I would be involved with for that are going to take up a lot of my energy and time. And it can be really rewarding.
Yeah. So when I met you, I don't know how many years ago, back when I was still in Phoenix and trying to figure out how to make my film, you took me around Pure Flix, gave me a tour, and we actually had a really good conversation in your office. And it was all sparked off of the fact that you had a Top Gun poster hanging on your wall. Can you explain why you had that in your office? I'm assuming you still have it in your office.
Sure. No, I like to switch out the movie posters,
Okay.
from time to time, just keep it interesting. But the reason that I had that one on the wall was an illustration of some of what I just had mentioned, and that was that movie poster. And I remember when the movie came out, it was a big hit movie. And since that time, which has been decades, I had run into no less than 5 or 6 different people through the years that actually went into the military to fly fighter planes because they saw that movie when they were young. And so the impact of that movie on the military to just even recruit was massive. Recruit new pilots and to inspire young people to do something that adventurous.
Right.
But besides that, in the poster, he's wearing his leather bomber jacket, which those things sold off the shelves, and the Ray-Ban aviator glasses. It was like a 10x sales change from one year to the next.
Yeah.
So that to me just represented the impact of a 2-hour movie, how it can have such a dramatic impact on culture. But I'm trying to do it with, like I said, a little more of an eternal significance. So some of the movies that I've been involved with have been really good that way. It's always rewarding to hear comments, and to even to this day, I can jump into any of those movies and read Google comments on some of the movies and see that people have been encouraged in their faith or have found, solace in watching some of these things and some of the characters. So that's always rewarding.
Yeah. Well, maybe this is a good place to kind of transition into the main conversation because I was really interested to talk to you specifically because you decided in your filmmaking goal to work directly with a company that brands itself as Christian filmmakers or Christian films. And I wondered how you felt about that and sort of the way that it kind of has a bit of a stigma with culture sometimes.
Yeah, it's a great conversation, and there's a lot to say about that because I have a clear recollection of a conversation I had with somebody after the movie God's Not Dead came out, and this was a fellow Christian who was really lambasting the movie as a terrible movie, and even a lot of those types of movies of being so bad. And I remember sort of confronting him, not in a combative way, but just to say, well, just hold on for a second, because listen to what you're saying. They're articulating the gospel in these films, and I could really respect that. But from a purely filmmaking perspective, there's a lot to criticize in these low budget independent films, particularly in the faith arena. But the reality is that there's just a lot of bad movies out there. They're not all
Yeah.
faith movies that are bad movies.
Yeah, totally.
um, I actually got, some comfort when I was exploring whether or not I would join in with PureFlix, because I spent a lot of time talking to Russell, who had since did pass away that next year in 2015. But his business partners is David A.R. White and Michael Scott. And I've gotten to know them well over the years, of course. And Michael and I talked, and they were under no illusion that they were, creating movies very specifically for a target audience at a particular budget level. And they knew the pain, and they had seen a lot of other filmmakers making bad movies. So they were well aware. It wasn't like they didn't know that these movies had some severe flaws. But there's a lot of aspects that go into making a great movie, as you know, Cassidy. I mean,
Yeah.
I'll get to ask you some questions along the way here too.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah. So anyway, I had a really high respect for the fact that these guys were making movies with the gospel very clearly presented, and probably sometimes sacrificing being really cool at cocktail parties because of it. So it is way cooler to make a horror movie or a really gritty R-rated movie that has subtle faith suggestive tones. That's not the kind of movies that these guys were making. They were making gospel movies, like where somebody had a cringeworthy conversion scene in there.
Yeah.
But you know what would happen? You would hear all these testimonies of people that got saved because they watched these scenes, and you couldn't deny that. Whereas you could take some really cool mainstream movies with some great spiritual illustrations, but you're not going to see direct testimonies of, I actually asked Jesus into my heart to be my savior because I saw it in the movie War Room, or God's Not Dead, or whatever. So the goal is always to create better art.
Yeah.
It's not honoring to God to go out and create a crappy movie. So that was never something I was attracted to. In fact, I despise the fact that Christians oftentimes are really uncreative too often, and they can just tend to rip off ideas that are in the mainstream, and that pains me.
Yeah.
So there's some great examples also of some really good stuff out there.
Yeah. Well, I take your point about there's just a lot of bad movies out there because it's very true. I think sometimes I myself have some woes of like sort of the Christian films because a lot of them do end up being a bit heavy-handed. But I also recognize there's just a lot smaller pool of people really aiming their sights at using religion in the fullest sense into these stories and weaving them together. And so they just stand out more because they're not in a sea of like, other movies trying to do the same. And so yeah, like for as many bad Christian movies you have, you can have 10 times that of non-Christian movies that are just as bad. But we just don't have that much of a emotional attachment to it because it's not so. Most of those bad movies aren't usually so emotionally tied to what people build their lives on or their identities or what have you.
It's a perfect observation. I mean, if we were in a niche, society of, I don't know what, trumpet players, and then we saw a movie coming out that was sort of trying to find its audience with us trumpet players, and it was terrible, we would all say, "Oh, trumpet player movies are the worst." But it's, if you're just making a mainstream movie and it happens to be horrible, you don't get put into that same box.
Yeah, totally. Um, what is your thought on The Chosen? Because that certainly has changed
Well,
the face of.
it's remarkable.
Yeah.
I have, again, just a really high regard for Dallas Jenkins. First of all, he's the creator of The Chosen, and he continues to be the vision and the lead of that as they go into their. I think they're going to go into sixth season. They just finished up filming their fifth season that will come
Mm.
out this next year in 2025. So it's a phenomenon, I think, and I think Dallas would say the same thing. He was kind of at the end of his rope as a filmmaker, and he created this sizzle for a story about an episodic of Jesus' life, which hadn't been done. But beyond that, he happened to find a partnership with the Harmon brothers and Angel VidAngel at the time, who was going through a pretty high profile lawsuit with some of the studios over their filtering technology. And they needed to raise a lot of money to defend themselves in court. And those guys are very, very entrepreneurial guys.
Mm.
And they figured out a way to use a relatively new system that was approved by the SEC and the US government to be able to crowdfund, and it ended up coming at the perfect time for Dallas Jenkins and this little idea to crowdfund it, and they got a bunch of money, and they had the perfect audience that happened to be the audience that were customers of VidAngel, this filtering software, and they came together perfect. So then The Chosen went on to become a phenomenon. It's been seen like over 580 million times around the globe. The Pay It Forward campaign has been very effective in spreading the word about the series, and they've done a good job with production value, creativity. It's of course come under scrutiny by a lot of Christians for using some creative license where it's not there, but
Hmm.
that's you're guaranteed to get attacked. Anything good you
100%.
do,
100%. So somebody's gonna not like something you do. That's just a guarantee.
right? That's
Can you explain to me
mhm.
a little bit more what VidAngel is? I don't know if I have heard
Yeah,
about
so
that.
VidAngel originally was a set-top box hardware and software. So I think it was Jordan was a coder. And these are brothers up in Utah that, again, just really great business sense. They grew up in a pretty poor environment there in Utah, but they just had a lot of savvy about them. Um, I listened to a podcast where they were interviewed on Jim, what's his name? Mike Rowe, the
Yeah.
Dirty Jobs guy.
Yeah.
He interviewed a couple of the brothers, and they told their story. It was phenomenal. Number one, I remember they're marketing experts also. They created a couple of products that sold really well, just independent products. One's called the Squatty Potty,
Oh yeah.
and the commercial's hysterical. It's a unicorn, pooping rainbow poop in, and uh, then they created another device that solves bad breath. It's some sort of tongue scraper. And anyway, these guys, and then Jordan, I think, wrote the code, the software code for VidAngel, which was this device to filter movies and TV shows, and you would just plug it right into your TV set. And then what they did, and again, I'm not the expert on this, but they were buying movies, the DVDs, and storing them, and then when people wanted to watch those things, they could watch them through the VidAngel system, but they could filter out language, violence and sexual situations.
Hmm.
But then they got sued by the studio saying you were infringing on the art, on the rights of, and the artists, of course, weren't happy that they were changing that. Now,
Hmm.
this was happening, in other places like airlines, they were not showing graphic scenes, but the studios came after them and they won the court cases. And VidAngel did modify to just a straight software. And I think it's still available now. I think that there's,
Hmm.
so far as I know, I think you can still use some filter software, but I'm not certain about that, like
Yeah.
where it's an app on your TV at this point. So it just transformed into a media company that is now called Angel Studios. So The
Right.
Chosen launched them, but they immediately adapted and started growing this crowdfunding platform to be able to make other movies like The Shift and The Sound of Freedom, which was a phenomenon in
Yeah.
2022. Um, Several other movies like Cabrini, and they've got His Only Son, and movies that have performed really well at the box office. So it's quite a success story.
Yeah. No, I've heard about a lot of those. I haven't watched every one of those, but you hear a lot about, especially Sound of Freedom. That was a big thing, especially in sort of the culture war arena. I mean,
Right.
what are your thoughts about sort of the censorship aspect of the software? Do you think it's a good thing?
Well, I understand the intent, but having worked with writers and directors, I can understand how you don't want your, like Shakespeare wouldn't want his stuff out there where somebody decided to just cut out 17 pages of one of his plays.
Sure.
Um, so I can understand it from that side too, especially if you feel like they're spending time on every. We can have a lot of opinions about the gratuitous nature of what Hollywood does oftentimes because
Hmm.
it really gives people what they want, but sometimes it's pressing the envelope. And
Yeah.
I'm kind of the opinion that artists should be able to make whatever art they want. I'm disappointed oftentimes of what people want, so they'll.
Yeah. Well, and it's hard too to know, is this what the artist wants, or is this what the studio is pushing because they think it's going to sell? I'm not quite sure. I'm like,
It's probably a little of both sometimes, depending on who the
yeah,
people are that are
yeah.
involved.
I'm with you. I think if we can have more intentionality with how we create, there's definitely a place where that censorship becomes less and less necessary because you can embed it in the full that points us to better story, like that matches the story we live versus the
I
one
would
we
be
want to create.
more inclined. Yeah, it's an interesting thing because it's a much deeper discussion on
Yeah.
where we are as a culture and people and
Hmm.
and and even political. You get into some of that arena where you start to censor because it's good for society, but it can ultimately come back to haunt you in different ways that are unintended.
Yeah.
So I would really like to see people have the freedom to do things, but I'm also aware of people doing things in the name of freedom that end up being really destructive. So
Yeah.
it's a tough one.
Yeah. I think we're in the same place with that one. Last question, then I can kind of turn to you, see if you have anything you want to ask me. But is there anything that you learned from your baseball career that has helped you navigate this field of filmmaking and trying to kind of change Christian culture?
Well, it feels like I played baseball 100 years ago at this point, but I know there's things that certainly apply. Everything that we do ultimately is an experience that feeds into the next chapters of our lives. So certainly baseball is, I'm grateful that I got to do it. I was built to compete and athletically, obviously I enjoyed that. So I'm so grateful that I got the opportunity to do it and do it at that level, because it's surreal, to be with people that you watch on TV all the time and then to be a part of that environment
Mm,
takes a little while to get used to.
right.
Um,
Yeah, I
and
didn't
then,
even think about
just
that. Yeah, I wouldn't have thought
yeah,
about that.
it's funny when oftentimes people will ask about your first game because that is it's a show stopping event, but really it's your first entire year
Mm,
of playing that is an out of body experience.
Yeah, I can imagine that.
Just because you're working with and against people that you see they're celebrities, and then then you meet bona fide celebrities, whether they're in out of actors or singers or artists or politicians. They're all around. In fact, one of the most amazing things that happened to me was within 2 weeks of me getting called up to the big leagues. We went to New York to play the Mets, and I came into the locker room with a couple other guys. We had gone to the field, and the players typically would go to the field in taxis, just a bunch of different taxis or the subways, whatever. And I came into the locker room there with a few guys, and I went over toward my locker, but I happened to see 20 feet away, I saw Bill Murray talking to one of the other players. And I was just like, oh my goodness, that's Bill Murray. And I remember thinking, oh yeah, he's a Cub fan. He's a big Cub fan. And he at one point looked over at me and he said my name and came over to talk to me. And it just knocked my socks off. I was like, what is going on right now?
Bill
Is this
Murray
really
knows
happening?
my name, yeah.
Yeah. I'm just Shawn from Reno, Nevada. How is this happening?
Yeah.
So that was an amazing thing. But what I probably, there's so many things that I learned in competing and trying to to be the best that I could be, and watching people that did it better than everybody else. I have a really pragmatic view of business and film or the arts, and that is largely centered around talent and gifting and passion. So I tend to like to put together teams of people that are really talented. I just look for talented people, not people that necessarily love movies, but people that are talented. And sometimes you don't know. You don't know early on in somebody's career if they're going to be really talented. So there's just opportunities. It doesn't take talent to work hard at something. But what you can't do is get talent if it's not there. You can get better. But if you're, like we're watching the Olympics right now, these are the best athletes in the world competing in all their sports. They're the best in the world. They're not just the people that worked the hardest. See, that's a little bit of a misconception in our world now, that if you just work hard, you can do anything you want to do. And I say, I wish that was the case. But people that are really artistically inclined and they demonstrated that throughout their life, usually the best are really good at when they're 7 years old. They didn't just decide to do something at 17 years old. They kind of started in on that early on. So, the thing about the film world is it does take a lot of money. You just need a lot of money to do it, to compete with the mainstream type stuff. That doesn't mean you can't be creative and do some really interesting stuff when you're younger, but so that's probably the most sort of pragmatic part that I came out of my baseball career is, if you're going to put together a good team or you're going to do a project, you need really talented people typically, or else you're just crossing your fingers and hope it all comes together.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And I've done that before too.
Have you ever seen the
problem with
oh, go ahead.
Sorry, Cassidy. The problem with the Christian environment oftentimes is that there's this default that you go, we're going to do this trusting God, unlike all these other people. But you can get 5 people that have no talent go, we're going to trust God. And then it's still likely going to be bad.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But have you ever seen the film Moneyball?
Yeah, I love that movie.
Yeah. See, that's how I often see like like teams and talent, where sometimes people are really talented, they're just in the wrong role. And if you could just switch it around in a way that, people don't typically think of, like you could have like the winning team. But yeah, sometimes it feels like studios try to put people in certain boxes and do things the way that has always been done, instead of thinking a little more creatively about things.
Well, I think in the independent realm, you do need to use more creative resources to do things a little differently. You don't have the luxury of being able to just kind of fill up your roster with all-star players and then go for it. You do have to put the pieces together a little different, think creatively, and and maybe do things different. And there's a lot to be said about that. And I know there's lots of actors that love the independent arena because they can kind of do some different things that the studios don't allow for. It's not
Right.
quite as commercial.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, did you have any questions for me?
Well, of course, I wanted to hear about your independent journey, and what have been your observations of that, that what changed from before you made your first movie to after you made your first movie?
Oh,
What did you learn or discover?
yeah. Well, that's a big question because my whole life changed pretty quickly after I finished wrapping my first film. So I'd done a lot of short independent films, like comedies, narratives, but all sort of in the nonfiction realm. And then when I came back home, I decided I want to try to make my first feature, and I decided to do it about the tip-free restaurant movement in the U.S. And a lot of that was just born out of being in the right place at the right time. When I moved to San Francisco to go to school, I was working at this restaurant in Oakland, and they went tip-free while I was working there, so I got to see what was happening, and it's very tied to the changes in minimum wage as well. So there was sort of that political, like, culture, um, culture war stuff going on around that, where you know people were just trying to figure out, okay, there's all of this political stuff that's changing, and the narratives aren't quite matching what's playing out in the world. But how do we still, try to give our workers the best place to work and fairest pay as possible, independent of whatever the laws are doing? And so I just thought it was very interesting. And I thought that the ethos behind that was something that I thought was really beautiful and that I thought did align with my Christian faith at the time. So it's like, okay, well, let me try to make a film that can do that without trying to incite more outrage. Let's just say, okay, here's what happened, here's how it played out, and here's what people are doing. And that was like, it was so much fun. And while I was doing that, I was working um, as a production assistant, sort of video production manager at a comedy festival that was doing sort of live stand-up comedy for sort of up and coming stand-up acts. And so it was really fun to be able to do that and still be in comedy, which was really what I went to film school to do, is to make comedy. But now I'm doing this thing on tipping. But I think doing that while I had this made me realize, I think that whatever I do, it's got to have some deeper meaning for me than just a good time. Because, it's fun to have a good time, and I loved being there. But the best thing that I got out of the comedy world was the relationships, where probably the best thing I got out of working during the documentary stuff was probably some relationship, but more just like meaning and like, oh, this was like really moving me something purposeful.
Have you ever thought about trying to mix those two things? I mean, it's a really tough assignment, but
Yes, I
it's
have. I don't know if I've cracked the code, but that kind
yeah.
of leads to the point where you finish the film, and I was doing both of these at the same time, and then 2020 happened, and everything shut down. So my idea was like, I'm going to get this film out, put it in the 2020 festival cycle. People will be talking about minimum wage and politics, and it'll be a good time to have the conversation. But then the world shut down and nobody was talking about minimum wage and everybody was talking about whether we should wear masks or not. And so I just kind of put everything to the side and I slowed down. And I did end up getting it into the 2021 festival cycle. I went to Portland Film Festival, which was really nice. Um, but right around then, I had met my husband, was planning to move to the Netherlands. And so it sort of all got put on hold. And then very shortly, I got married and started having started a family, had a baby. And so it's sort of been this thing where it's like, okay, I have this film, it's done. Yet I've kind of changed my whole life to make it so that filmmaking isn't necessarily a primary thing I can do at this point. So right
Mm.
now, I'm sort of working with a friend of mine who's trying to help me figure out how to get the movie out. I'm probably just going to self-distribute it somehow. But I learned a lot about intentionality and stewardship of the little things because we did it on a
Right.
shoestring budget. I mostly paid it out of my pocket. We did a little bit of crowdfunding, but mostly paid it out of my pocket. And yeah, we were just pretty much three-person team trying to do this thing.
Yeah,
Um,
there's a lot to say about that. because that's truly slugging it out of a passion to put together the story, right? So
Yeah.
what would you say is the biggest thing that you learned about putting together a movie like that?
Oh, you can't do it all by yourself. There's this instinct when you're independent, and especially like it's your passion project. You're like, I can do all of that. I've done all of these roles independently. I can do all of that. But no, you can't. You got to figure out how to. You got to figure out how to pay pay to help get help, if that makes any sense. I remember the first day I went to shooting, and there was still in the back of my mind, well, I could hire an editor, but maybe I can edit it. And after the first day of shooting, I'm like, nope, I'm going to hire an editor. That would be a terrible idea. And so we still didn't probably have, it probably would have been better film if we could have had more people. But I'm actually really proud with what we did, with how many people we had and what kind of funds we had. I think we stretched our dollars really well. But as a side, I also think that there is something interesting about making your first project, whether it's a big one or a small one, out of your own pocket, because it teaches you a lot about where the money goes. And I think
Yeah.
it teaches you also how to think more intentionally about the things you're
Oh,
given.
that's such a great observation, because of course I get pitched stories regularly every week, and filmmakers typically just want to tell their story. They're pretty sure that they've got a great story to tell. They just need money, whether it's $300,000 or $2 million. It's a great question to ask any aspiring filmmaker. How much do you think you're going to want to spend on this? Like, is this a $10 million movie, or are you saying you? Because if they don't know the answer, that tells you a lot right away. But if they do know the answer, they've thought through that, and they think that they can do it on a shoestring budget. And then the question is, how do you do it? And then how do you make that money back?
Yeah. Well, that's the hard part. I went into it knowing, okay, I'm going to put money in and I'm probably not going to get it back, but that's okay because the point was to make a film to show what I could do and to tell the story that I think needed to be told at that moment.
Right.
And so, I got, there's a lot more in returns besides money. And,
Yep.
the
For
first go,
sure.
I went to film school, so I obviously got an education in filmmaking, but it's a whole different education when you take on your first feature and you have to run with the ball on your own, and there's not the safety net. And yeah, there's some things like, why didn't they tell me this in school? But you can't actually learn it until you go and do it.
Right.
But
Perfect.
yeah, but I don't know. That's very filmmaking. But I think personally, I kind of learned that as much as I love it, there are probably more important things to chase down than just creating things. And
Well, that's
so,
how you find out too.
yeah,
You do find out by jumping into it,
yeah.
and well, now you have a little baby that's depending on you, and yeah, you can still do it
Oh,
in
yeah,
different, but it's just a different equation maybe now.
totally. Well, I mean, for the first year, she's basically dependent on me all the time for like food, drink, and life. And so,
Everything.
yeah, so it's like, but it's this beautiful thing. It's definitely going through motherhood changed the way that I thought and how I behaved, and it changes the stories I want to tell too. So I haven't written off filmmaking, but there's that point of like, okay, well, I've had to put it on hold for a while, and I'm okay with that. And let's get this thing out that let's finish this thing that I started running with a long time ago. Let's get it out and then clear the slate and see what comes from it. But those are kind of the big things that I've learned.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, there is a lot to be learned by taking some risk. Um, but it's risk is just by definition not safe, but it doesn't mean it's reckless either.
Right.
It's just taking some risk in an adventure to go learn and grow. And sometimes you suffer some setbacks. You just don't want them to define your life,
Yeah.
hopefully.
Yeah. No, because some risk is. I have my friend Nathan Jacobs. He was talking to me about filmmaking earlier on when I was trying to figure out, do I put myself in the film or not? Because it was very close to the story, but I didn't really want to put myself in because I just felt like that would be weird. But anyways, he was talking to me about filmmaking and how it's basically Vegas. You know, you can do all the numbers, you can try your best to figure out what's going to work, but you're kind of betting the house that your instinct is a good instinct. And yeah, if you,
Yeah, you are betting on yourself
yeah,
and your sensibilities and your understanding of the audience and the
yeah,
story, all those things. Yeah.
yeah.
And that's pretty fun actually.
Yeah, yeah. As long as you do it, I don't know. As long as you do it, like you said, like do the calculated risk. Don't put your whole house into a film if you've never made one before. Maybe start with a
Right.
short and use your iPhone. I don't know, but yeah, I
Exactly.
don't know. Well, yeah, this has been really great. Is there any sort of other questions you have for me, or
Well, I'd say what would you, if you could do anything at this point going forward, what would your, based on kind of where you've been, what would you like to do? What would be rewarding? What would be fun to do?
well, I'm working right now on trying to get a short film produced. Um, I wrote the script maybe a month ago, and so now I'm trying to uh, connect with the woman whose music it was inspired by to see if she'll be willing
Mhm.
to let me do it. But
Like to do it?
that's yeah, but that's sort of the thing. But I'd like to get back into narrative filmmaking. Not that documentary filmmaking wouldn't still be on the table, but narrative was always my first love, and I think there's a lot of true stories you can tell about real people that are better accepted in fictional frames. So
Like,
there's
what's some examples of that? So where do you see those? Like, what's an example of the types of movies that maybe are more mainstream, but they're in narrative format?
yeah, well, I that's a good question. I have to think about that and like, but I'll give you an example of my short. So my short is about infertility and sort of the struggle with not being able to give life even though you really want to, and it's very
Yeah.
framed in sort of a Christian's perspective, where this woman is she throughout the film there's these like prayers that she's saying, and I became Orthodox, Eastern Orthodox a couple of years ago, so it's sort of in that frame of the Eastern Orthodox tradition where you
Mm.
have these prayer rules that you read, and so taking some of those prayers and kind of contrasting that with the real life things we experience in life that are kind of painful for
Mm.
women who can't have babies and all of those things. And
Right, right.
if you did a documentary about that, people would think it's heavy-handed and you're trying to do that. But if you can turn it and play with the tension, all of a sudden it kind of invites people in to say, okay, these are real people with real, like this real like pain and faith, but it's kind of that tension that you're seeing, that
Sure.
it's not just easy. I mean, I think there's been plenty of films out there that have kind of played with those tensions. Like Mel Gibson had the one with what is it called, with Andrew Garfield with the gun. He was the guy. It was the Hacksaw Ridge.
Yes, right. When you mentioned his name, I thought of the movie Father Stew with Mark Wahlberg, but Hacksaw Ridge was
He did.
a good example of that tension. Okay, I see what you're saying. So yeah, this goes back to your sort of, design as an artist, is people want to tell stories. And the question is how do you tell it? And what's the goal? I mean, if you
Yeah.
tell that story, you could do it 10 different ways.
Yes.
And so you as the artist are deciding what would be the way that would be the most impactful and artistic way to deliver this to an audience, because at the end of the day, that's what everybody wants, is they want to give something to an audience that moves people, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
That makes them think, that inspires them, that makes them angry, makes them introspective, whatever it is. That is the essence of a storyteller.
Hmm.
But I've always said, why I get nervous over biography type movies,
Yeah.
because they tend to try to cover too much ground,
Yeah.
and they just historically have been undependable commercially. But there's great examples of some that have done well. Like
Yeah.
I'm just trying to think of something like presidents. Let's say JFK was pretty successful, or Lincoln. You know,
Hmm.
but they tend to take a smaller slice of that character and then and then tell a story that reflects on who they were as a complete person. But that said, you could take a say a story on some historical figure, assign it to 10 different writers and directors, and get completely different results,
Yeah.
even though
Yeah.
they're talking about the same subject. So this is the X factor in the art world that makes it tough to predict what's going to happen, which is why I go back to talent. If somebody's really talented and they just have a knack for storytelling, they're going to probably break through in a way that somebody else might not be able to. But that doesn't mean that they shouldn't be able to do it. Again, if I had a love for painting, I just need to know what my what's real. Should
Right.
I try to make a living being a painter? That's why there's the famous term struggling artist.
Yeah.
If it's really just deep-seated passion and it's all they want to do, but they can't even buy bread, um, well, that's their choice. But it gets to a spot of diminishing returns if you have a family and you're supposed to support them and you're painting, but nobody's buying your paintings.
Yeah. There's
That's where it
different
gets more tricky.
Yeah, there's different arenas, and you kind of have to learn how to recognize yourself, but also with the help of others, what arena you should be playing in, whether that's just in
Yeah,
your home with your friends, your family, or take it all the way to Hollywood or whatever.
yeah,
There's just
exactly.
different spaces. So I've been enjoying playing in the little leagues though. It's kind of
Well, that's
fun.
good because
There's a little less
yeah,
pressure, and you can really kind of figure out what it is you have to say and why you're
yeah.
trying to say
What do
it.
you want to lean into? What stories do you want to tell? How do you do it? Yeah, yeah. I think that's great because at the end of the day, if you do trust God, then you at some level have decided to trust Him with results,
Yeah.
and that means you go. It's always a mystery, and I frankly had this when I was playing baseball. That you say, okay, as a Christian, I'm not defined by my career. Um, so therefore, I just do the best that I can.
Right.
But oftentimes, I noticed that I happened to perform better when things were really stressful and dire, and it was do or die. And that kind of bothered me. I'm like, I thought I was just going to do the best I can no matter what, but I noticed that I perform a little better when I actually am super angry or my pride has been, stirred up
Mm.
because of another player or another team, to where I'm like, I'm going to beat you. So that part is, it's like God gives the increase. He's always in charge, but there is this mystery of how much we have to be putting into it. He gave us a
Mhm.
brain, he gave us creativity. So there's always some of that tension, I think. If you're really ambitious about making your project and want to see it be a worldwide phenomenon, that probably will drive you in ways that if you just decided to sit back and take care of your baby and do a kind of a hobby style, it would be much different. So, look, I don't know the answer to that, but it's what makes this whole arena kind of interesting too.
Yeah, well, and I worked in comedy for a long time, and so what you realize is that sometimes those sort of grinds that you have to do in the comedy club scene where you're on the little stages and not these big arenas is exactly what you need to get to a place where you can be like the top of the top and tell these jokes
Great point.
with this seamlessness. It's like you have to face that tension. And there's a little bit of this tension where we want to bring people up to bigger stages before they're ready, but there's wisdom in letting people stay where they are to keep honing the craft because you can't do it without
Exactly.
that sort of furnace, that crucible.
Well, right, and that is the mistake that a lot of Christians make is they go, I've seen a lot of bad Christian stuff, so I'm going to write a script and it'll be a big hit. And usually that's not the way it works. To your
No.
point, you people that are successful have refined their craft over decades usually. Um,
Hmm.
so you got to jump in somewhere if you really enjoy it, and hopefully that passion will carry you through the tough times. Comedy, how you have seen, it's a tough lifestyle for people trying to succeed in comedy.
Yeah.
And very few make it, like in a lot of other ways, but they put in hours and hours of testing and trying things, uh, and then we as an audience show up and go, that guy stinks, he's terrible. And it's easy for us to say that. I mean, but he's been working on this every day.
Well,
So
and you really, when you're in the audience, as I was so many times, you really recognize that sometimes it's not a bad joke or a bad delivery. It's just not the right audience that is being delivered to. Because 2 nights ago it killed, but now it's not
uh,
at all. So,
so interesting.
yeah.
Yeah, that's so interesting.
Yeah.
Well, there is a lot of these dynamics at work, and it makes it sort of fun, but a little nerve wracking. I'm filming a movie right now in Morocco that will come out next spring, and you know, we think it's going to be good, but we don't know. And we are we going to find our audience? Hopefully, but you got to spend a bunch of money marketing it,
Hmm.
and that means raising money, and there's risks involved, but it is exciting. You just hope you get to experience, some victory along the way, and
Yeah.
not just hits. I
Yeah.
mean, getting hit hard.
Yes. Yes, I understand. Um, what's your favorite film that you've ever been involved with?
Um,
That
oh
might be a hard
gosh.
question to answer.
Well, I mean, the movie that I thought would do really well, and I think it turned out great, and I'm proud to have been involved with it, is Redeeming Love, which was based on a really strong novel by Francine Rivers that a lot of people had read, a lot of women, moms, grandmas, they all kind of read it. So we really felt like it had a built-in audience, but the topic was always going to be a challenge because, of course, she's trafficked into the sex industry, and
Hmm.
and then it gets essentially rescued by a godly man. But that didn't play well in today's culture, where they're like, well, we don't really want a story where first of all, that guy seems just too good to be true. But in the book, he obviously is, he's he's that way intentionally as Jesus who saves us.
Yeah.
And we're all the ones that are needing to be saved. But it did not play well in just the visual environment. Whereas it was a great novel, it didn't play well visually, even though it was shot beautifully and it was faithful. But that movie, I think, is still powerful. I cried. I'm not even a crier, and I cried at the end of that movie several times.
Mm.
But other movies like The Case for Christ was really well done, and
I like that one a lot.
I thought it was interesting. Uh, there's probably a lot more moments than any particular movie that I
Mm.
go, oh, that was just so great. It was sobering. This is just on another note to see a movie that some other people made that our company took to the market, but we didn't make the movie, and it was called Same Kind of Different as Me. And this movie was made for 15 million bucks, and it starred Renee Zellweger and Greg Kinnear and Jaimin Hunsu and John Voight, and just
Mhm.
really had all the elements based on a best-selling book. Um, just a really great story of friendship, but it completely flatlined, and that was really sobering
Mm.
to go, oh my goodness, what happened? I thought there's no formula. Um, you could tell again, like I said, you could probably do that movie in a different way, maybe title it different, recut it, who knows, and then it could work. But it's a finicky world. The art world is.
Oh, definitely. And it's all evolving and changing, especially as equipment to make films is getting cheaper and cheaper. There's not as much need for gatekeepers, but then you lose out a little bit on what it was to have a gatekeeper.
There's
Yeah.
tons of discussion nowadays about the new tools, including AI tools, to make film production more efficient. And well, but then there's questions about rights, using people's likeness in movies. The where this is all going is super interesting right now, and the
Yeah.
fact that, to your point, there's audiences spread everywhere because there's so many different ways to put your content out there, but it still comes down to economics ultimately for the bigger studios and the
Mhm.
streaming platforms. So if you can shoot a 2 hour movie today and have it available for the entire globe to watch tomorrow on a YouTube or a website or something like that. But monetizing it is a little bit more of a challenge.
Yeah, definitely. Um,
But it didn't used to be where
mhm.
you couldn't make a feature length movie and have it available for everybody to watch. This wasn't possible.
No, one of the most rewarding things I ever did in film school is learn how to change a film reel. and having to shoot a short film on actual film, because all of a sudden you realize, oh, this is a whole different world. It's sort of dangerous because you start doing it and you're like, I never want to shoot on anything else again, but you're not going to make another movie if you only want to shoot on film. But it definitely kind of
Right.
showed you that sense. And we didn't even cut it the way they used to, where you're like literally cutting. We got it digitally scanned and then cut it just like normal. But
Mm. And
there's
that's
something very
yeah.
interesting about being able to be through that process and see what the very earliest filmmakers had to go through, and even till very recently, and still some people are doing that now, shooting on film, which is
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah. Well, the whole industry takes all these different parts to it. It is really interesting that even in our movie that's filming right now, we had such a challenging task um, getting the right cast together
Mm.
because commercially you need to have recognizable faces and names,
Hmm.
but they have risks in doing something attached to an independent film company
Right.
because they want to get, again, there's a big economic engine, and the streaming platforms, Hulu, Netflix, Amazon, all of them are paying big numbers to get these mainstream artists, and then the studios of course are paying big numbers to get the mainstream artists for anything that they're going to release broadly. And there's kind of a risk that they get tagged with not only the cultural wars, but that even if they get paid well, they could be sacrificing the rest of their career because
Yeah.
they did a faith title. It's
Hmm.
really interesting stuff. It's
Hmm.
always changing too.
Yeah.
So it's
There's much more relational currency going on than we recognize, which
yeah,
makes it
that's
tricky.
probably the lesson. The whole lesson is take good care of your friendships and well, even people you don't like, take good care of them.
Oh. Well, do you, who do you in the sort of Hollywood sphere think is doing a really good job bridging sort of the faith and culture conversation? Is there anybody who you see and you think, oh wow, I think they're doing something interesting, even if maybe they're not even Christian themselves?
Yeah, you could probably, it depends on how you measure it, I guess. If you said who's doing it really broadly, um, Mel Gibson's done it on a few of his projects. The
Hmm.
Passion of the Christ was a super big surprise, and he's got the second one coming,
Hmm.
the follow on to that. And Mark Wahlberg, I don't know if you've noticed, but he's leaned into his faith. He's a Roman Catholic, I think he would say, or just Catholic. But he has different like um, apps, and like prayer.com I think
Mm.
had him featured where he said let's pray together, and he's been inspiring through a lot of the projects that he's done. He wants to do more things that are in the faith realm, and the thing
Mm.
about those guys is they have a big name and followings and credibility. It seems like Tom Hanks has done a few things that have great faith themes in them. And then you can't deny Dallas Jenkins and The Chosen. Its reach has been phenomenal around the globe. It's in almost every language, dubbed into all these foreign languages. So not just subtitles, but and what Angel Studios is doing has been disruptive to the industry because they have such a big audience that is now subscribe to their guild, they call it, where they can watch teasers of different concepts and vote on
Mm.
which ones should make it
Hmm.
to a theatrical release. So Sound of Freedom was, I don't really classify that as a faith title, but it was certainly huge success. And um, then there's the Irwin brothers and Kevin Downs. Kevin is probably the best example of a classic faith, you know, pioneer. He and John Irwin and Andy Irwin started Kingdom Story
Hmm.
production company. They did I Can Only Imagine, I Still Believe, um, American Underdog.
Hmm.
John Irwin now has a partnership with Amazon Studios called The Wonder Project. He's going to start developing some stuff. Kevin has done a number of movies like Jesus Revolution, Unsung Hero, Ordinary Angels that have gone to theaters and done well. He has a Lionsgate partnership for distribution. And John Irwin and Kevin Downs, in my opinion, are the ones that have sort of crossed over into studio quality stuff, but they still have a faith message. Now, it's not as direct or on the nose, but that's arguably maybe better for a wider audience.
Yeah. Well,
So
I'm interested.
this,
What do you think about Greta Gerwig? She's supposed to produce or direct the new Lion Witch in the Wardrobe series for Netflix.
well, it's audacious, and I'm glad that she's doing it. Um, yeah, I never really know how to judge those things and what the people's motivation is. I hope I always hope for the best.
Mm.
Yeah, I don't know. I hear consistently that there's this desire for more faith type stuff, and the question is, what does that actually mean? What does it mean to the studios? What does it mean to the filmmakers, or to the audience for that matter?
Right.
I've heard it for the last 3 years. It's like the studios want more faith. People want more faith. People want more, as the dividing lines in our culture have become so stark.
Right.
I think people are looking for good inspirational stuff. I don't know that they necessarily want Jesus. They just want something that will be sort of more wholesome or lift their eye line up to more peaceful and constructive things instead of tearing us apart. But I don't know for sure. So
Yeah.
you know,
No, it's interesting. I like Greta Gerwig a lot. I think she
yeah,
obviously is not I don't know if she would consider herself a Christian or not, but she definitely is doing interesting things with that sort of question of like faith and how do you orient yourself in a good life. And so I'm interested to see. I don't know how she'll do either, but I'm interested to see
yeah,
her take on it, because she makes interesting films.
for sure. Yeah, and that's why I say I kind of, you have to judge it when it comes out.
Yeah.
I try not to put too much expectation on the filmmakers to do
Yeah.
something that for me, because then you end up being disappointed. And visually, I have no doubt it'll be stunning, and some of those things. But
Yeah. Well, is there any last thoughts we can sort of land the plane? I want to say thank you so much for taking your time. I've really enjoyed your perspective, and yeah, these things about faith and film and how you kind of marry the two. I've been asking a lot of those questions, so it's interesting
I
to
think
see
we could
you.
go for another couple hours. I mean, your audience wouldn't endure it, but
No, well, I've got a pretty long-winded audience. They'll stay and listen to me talk for far too long. It's my Achilles heel, but
well, I'll be interested to see, kind of, yeah, how some of the projects you decide to tackle and how your movie gets distributed will be interesting. And I'll look forward to keeping connected on that
yeah,
because it's clearly in you. I mean, there's so many students going into film school nowadays, and I shake my head every time I find out that there's another one. But because it is magnetic, there's a draw to being creative and to telling stories that matter to people. So you can't deny that. So you have it. It's clearly in you. So that's going to be a part of your life. So the question is just how will God give the increase on that, in what direction? That'll be interesting to watch.
Well, thank you. I'm praying every day I can navigate it well because it's a beast of a world, entertainment, and you don't want to get lost in it. But there is something drawing that pureness of like creating something good. That's definitely calls my name. So.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for having me on your show.
Oh, thanks for joining. I really appreciate it.